Two Rivers Talks is brought to you by Two Rivers Biz Starts. Also by Two Rivers Main Street. And by Raleigh Point Economic Advising. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
And hello, everybody. This is Todd Nielsen with Two Rivers Talks. I am flying solo today. My colleague and compatriot and friend in crime, Darla Leclerc, is currently got some other commitments this afternoon. But we are excited and very fortunate to have a guest with us today, Mr. Patrick DeWane of The Accidental Hero, who is here to talk to us a little bit about his show and some of his experiences, or actually what's your grandfather's experiences, right?
Correct.
Being the liberator of Domyślica.
That's right. Awesome.
All right. Welcome to the show.
Native would smile and buy you a beer.
There we go. Now we had a chance to meet. Was it last year sometime? I think you were in Two Rivers for a radio show that we recorded part of on Two Rivers Talks, and learned a little bit about your story there. But we for some time now wanted to get you back on the show and to hear your story.
Terrific. Yeah, I think it was a Packer Sunday.
Yes, that's right.
we shot it, and then the game was right after that.
Right. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the story behind the accidental hero.
Sure. Well, it's my grandfather's story. Matt Konop was his name. A lot of people in Two Rivers knew him. He was an insurance salesman, and he was a World War II vet. He held me when I was days old, and I was a pallbearer at his funeral. And I grew up in the town to the north, a few miles, so we would visit Grandma and Grandpa several times a month. So he was this huge figure in my life. And his house over on School Street, right near the cemetery, was a little bit of a museum to World War II, but Grandpa wasn't talking about it. I was absolutely fascinated with the war, would beg him for war stories, and he'd say, no, you don't want to hear about that, and then never talked about it. He died in 1983. I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and nobody said a word about World War II. There wasn't a flag on the casket. There wasn't a bugler playing taps. So when we buried Grandpa, I figured that we buried his stories with him. 20 years later, my sister, Jane, was rooting around in my Aunt Jean's basement. Jean lives out, where the alpaca ranch is?
Oh, yeah, sure.
On the way to Michigan. Yeah, Jean and my Uncle Bob lived right near there. So Jane was snooping around through Jean's stuff in her basement. And her stuff was all of this stuff that Jean, as the youngest, got from my grandparents. And Jane came across then my grandfather's writings, right? And Grandpa used to hang out in his basement. He was an insurance salesman, and his office was also in his basement. And he'd go down there when he was retired and chain smoke Camel Straights, and he'd have all these different projects. He also was a gardener. So Grandpa downstairs was just sort of, that's where he hung out. That was his man cave. And down in his man cave, little did I know that he was writing about the war. And Grandpa was a lieutenant colonel. He was in the 2nd Infantry Division. He came over on Omaha Beach the day after D-Day, was a hero in the Battle of the Bulge. I knew none of this, not until Jane found his writings. And then where Grandpa's story turned, where it went from another soldier's tale to something more like a Greek epic or some sort of a mythical story, was the last week of the war, when his division, out of all the other divisions, was given the assignment to liberate southern Czechoslovakia. Grandpa, it turns out, I didn't know this until after he died, Grandpa grew up speaking Czech. Czech was his first language. He was learning Czech on the farm just outside of Stangleville, right just north of Mishkat, near Tisch Mills. He learned Czech, and that's all they spoke on the farm. He didn't learn English until they sent him to a one-room schoolhouse when he was 6 years old. So when his division gets this assignment to liberate southern Czechoslovakia, then they realized they weren't prepared for this. It wasn't part of their planned end of the war. The officers weren't happy about this. And Grandpa was one of the senior officers, so he's in this meeting. And then it comes to a halt because they don't have a translator. And then one of the other officers says, "Sir, Konop here, he speaks Czech." And then Grandpa writes that he thought that he was about to get an easy job translating documents far from any German bullets. So the general says, "Konop, is that true?" And he says, "Why, yes, sir. I can read it and I speak it too." And then the general says, "No problem here, Konop. You're now the commander of the advanced party. You and 500 men will leave first thing tomorrow morning. The rest of us will follow you all in 48 hours. So then him speaking Czech puts him at great risk because he's got to, and they knew that the war was nearly over. He had to go behind enemy lines into Germany, 200 miles to the Czech border as part of the advanced party, the avant-garde that's there preparing the way. Well, as they're making their way down, Grandpa sees that the map is going to take them to the Czech border, and that the closest town at the Czech border was a little village called Klenčí, which was his grandmother's hometown. All four of his grandparents had come from this little itty-bitty district along the Bavarian Czech border, a district called Hodsko. They were dirt poor and somehow got out and landed in just north of Two Rivers. So he sees that, my goodness, we're going to be showing up right near where Grandma was from. And then he's looking and he's seeing Marakov and Domašlice and all of these other towns that his grandparents would talk about, right? He was raised with the Czech bedtime stories and their wives' tales and all of that. He was really raised more in Czech culture than he would in what would be considered late 19th century, early 20th century American culture. So now, and he'd spent most of his life, Todd, sort of running away from that. He didn't want to be a farmer. It didn't strike his constitution at all to be a farmer. And he wanted to become an American, whatever that was. And it wasn't this backward upbringing that also gave him an accent that was so thick that he was captured not once but twice by his own army in the Battle of the Bulge because he didn't know the password, and that they thought that his accent, well, he was a German spy because they knew there were these German spies. So that nearly got him killed. He was put captive with other German spies, some of whom then were shot later that day because it's a violation of the Geneva Conventions to dress in the other army's uniform. So he nearly got shot in part because of his Czech upbringing. And then he finds himself, at the point of the spear going into Czechoslovakia. Well, he gets there and he's seeing all of this, and his curiosity and also kind of his just sense of adventure, his sense of, yeah, there are the rules, but if we work within and, kind of justifying. So he pokes in just to see what it was like. And when he gets into the town of Klenčí, miraculously, he ends up stumbling across a meeting of the local resistance, the local people who are meeting secretly to try to get rid of the Nazis. They heard rumors that the Americans were on their way. And then he shows up, walks into this meeting, first American that any of them had ever seen. They don't know what's going on, because if they get caught in this meeting, not only do they get killed, their families are probably killed and tortured as well.
Sure.
He walks in his lieutenant colonel uniform, and then starts speaking to them in their language. A language that's peppered with words that only their grandparents would use because he learned an 1860s version of the language. And this was 75, 80 years later, so of course languages evolved. So he's using these odd phrases and he's speaking it with an accent just like theirs, and he's telling them that they're free. Well, the room explodes into joy. They run over and they're hugging him and they're kissing him. And then he just keeps making it up as he goes along. He has them elect their provisional government. He goes out and decides with the newly elected police chief to round up Nazis. First one they come across is a guy whose last name is the same as his. So there's a little bit of the Luke Skywalker story in Grandpa's story, right? I mean, Luke thinks that he's just fighting the dark forces, and then suddenly, well, wait a minute, Skywalker, this is about your identity, about who you are. Same story with my grandfathers, right?
Wow.
Same story. Joseph Campbell in the book, The Hero of a Thousand Faces, right? The book that George Lucas based the mythology of Star Wars, the Skywalker things. Campbell was the first one to sort of, in the Western world, formally lay out what's called the hero's journey. It's one of the reasons why I call it the accidental hero. Grandpa would not like the word hero. Those World War II vets do not like it when they're called heroes, almost to a man. They say, I know what a hero looks like. We left them over there. They were face down in the mud. Don't call me a hero. But Grandpa's not here to edit the story or the title. He is here. I only use his words. I don't make any of this stuff up. So he finds himself that like Skywalker, he thinks he's just fighting the evil force, right? Putting the end to the Nazis. And then suddenly switches. No, Skywalker, no Konop. This is about who you are. You misunderstand who you are. You're running away from something. You don't even know what it is. So then they make a big deal about him, and they can't believe that they are being liberated, as they said, by one of their own. He didn't want any fuss. He turned down a promotion earlier in his Army career. He was in the reserves, and he just wanted to get through it. He didn't think he deserved it. So he was a humble guy. That's why I think he didn't publish this. He wrote it. He wanted it to be there. He wanted somebody to take this story. As an old school teacher, I think that he instinctively knew that, my God, this is something pretty extraordinary. This is like a Greek epic. It's like the Odyssey. But his humility kept him from saying, look at me, right? So suddenly the story becomes about him. And the Czechs, they aren't going to just let this go. They didn't want to be liberated by the Americans. They didn't want to be liberated by the Russians. They wanted to do it themselves. And to them, he was one of them. He had a name that they all knew. His grandparents were from that area. That all of these crazy coincidences, all of these little tumblers that had to click and lock into place for this amazing thing to happen, no, they're not going to let that slide by. So then when 2 days later, he gets to Domažlice, and they're waiting for him with banners, and they pick him up on their shoulders, and they carry him around town. So then atop their shoulders, and here, I'll get a prop. This is a pewter replica of the scene, right? There's an actual photograph. You can see in the background there, that's my show photograph. A photograph I never saw until I found my grandfather's writings, and a professor in New Jersey sent it to me, okay? Wow. So this is a replica of a plaque. He's being carried on the shoulders of the townspeople of Domažlice, and they're saying, Matt Konop is our liberator.
That's amazing.
We're liberated by one of our own. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it was like you said, when he showed up and he starts speaking in the local dialect of their parents or grandparents, that had to be like some mythic figure striding out of the past, to like, oh my goodness, who's here? Who's helping us, right?
Right. It'd be like if somebody from, I don't know, Asia showed up in Two Rivers and said, where's the bubbler, right? It's like,
right.
What? Right. I'll have perch and German potato salad with curds, please. It's like, how do you know us, right? How do you know us at that level?
Yeah. So he comes in. He's celebrated by the people in Domažlice, and I'm trying to connect this to sort of what happens at the Two Rivers eventually becomes the sister city.
Yeah.
Like, where does it go from here? Like, so he does that, and he kind of quietly, writes about it himself, and then it kind of gets tucked away. What happened when you found all this stuff and started unpacking it?
Yeah, well, I'm reading it, and I'm like, and on Christmas, right? So my sister makes copies, and she hands it out as, Christmas presents, and I'm like the 10-year-old boy who's gotten the little electronic game that he always wanted. I'm over sitting in a chair by myself, and I don't want anybody to bother me. And I'm flipping through going, I'd say, did you know that he came across an Omaha beach? And so, yeah, he talked, and it's like, oh, here we go again with the war. And I'm like, nope, no, how does nobody know this? Well, we kind of knew it. It's like, how did I never hear this, right? So then I became obsessed, okay? That just became obsessed with this story, and surprised that I didn't know about it, and that I'm connected to this guy who lived in this humble house on School Street and whom I'd known my whole life, who was sort of this master clown, this gardener, mushroom picker, that Grandpa lived this. And then I saw it was the hero's journey. I saw it was Luke Skywalker. And it's like, oh my God. Well, he wrote about it, so he wanted this to be there. And then I found other writings where he said he didn't want this published when he was alive, but then after he's gone, he said, we'll see what happens. Well, what happened, Todd, to answer your question, is that with the obsession, and I would work conversations that I was in, like at parties, around to talking about this, right? What's new with you? And I'd launch into what I just launched into with you. And then I said, no way, man. That's incredible. They ought to make a movie out of that. And I said, yeah, I mean, somebody should. And then one day a voice said, what are you waiting for? And I'm like, I don't know how to make a movie. Write a script. I'd spent my whole career on the business side of the arts, in New York, Philadelphia, and then Minneapolis. And so this voice is harassing me, saying, write a script, right? And I thought, okay. So I'm writing a script. And this is the same time that at work, I was working for Minnesota Opera, and we had commissioned an opera, a brand new opera, and boy, they would come in every day, and it was like the energy in our building was just shoot, just all this creativity. And I'd come home and I'd be writing the script, right? So it was this extraordinary period of time. There were times where I had to just at 1:30 in the morning just go to bed, right? I couldn't wait to get at it again. So then I wrote a script, and I didn't tell anybody I was doing this. And then I sent it to my theater professor from college, Doc Peak. So I sent it to Doc because I knew that Doc would never, he didn't pull any punches, especially with me. If he didn't think it was good, he would tell me that. And on the contrary, he said, follow this. And I'm like, okay. So then Doc sort of gave it its blessings, and then I kept writing on it, and then I did a staged sort of reading of it for friends, and then the day after that, I made my first trip to the Czech Republic, and with my mother and my uncle Jack, my grandfather's oldest son, Jack Konop, and when I was in Domažlice, because this trip went there for this big music festival, there was a sense that I knew you're going to be doing this show here sometime. And then I was like, well, what does that mean? How's that going to happen, right? And I didn't know how it was going to happen. So I came back, and then other people asked me to do the show, and then these gigs just started happening, right? And I was always afraid that gig was going to be the last gig. That was my biggest fear. And then I worked with some really good directors, a series of them. It took a while for the show to get into the form that it's in. And then a friend of mine runs a theater, wonderful theater, Downstairs Cabaret Theater in Rochester, New York. And I did it a couple of times there, and I did it on the 4th of July, and we did a live stream on the internet. And in my job at the opera, I'd been responsible for this PBS thing that we were doing and some broadcast stuff. So this real sort of inexpensive way of doing that, and this is like 8-9 years ago. This group that I met at this national conference where I moderated a panel about the digital distribution of opera, that this outfit out of Detroit really wanted to work with us. And I said, well, Detroit's not that far from Rochester, is it? She said, no, why? I said, well, I'm going to be doing my show, explain the show. She came over. We do this 4th of July. 14,000 people tuned in, including an 18-year-old in Pilsen, Czech Republic, who then friends me on Facebook. Tomáš, the great Tomáš Hateš. His birthday was just the other day. He turned 25. Happy birthday, Tomáš. He then Facebook friends me and says, would you come to Pilsen and be sponsored by our group for the annual Liberation Festival? I knew about this festival and I kept trying to get in through the front door. I couldn't make any progress. He sees the show, says, would you come and do the show? He's part of a group where they dress up in authentic U.S. Army GI outfits. And
Perfect.
Yeah, I'll send you some photos of that if you want. It's amazing. Hundreds and hundreds of people are dressed up like this. And there is a parade through Pilsen. I can send you footage of that too. Parade through Pilsen that have 200 authentic World War II vehicles, including this last year, a tank, to celebrate the fact that the Americans liberated Pilsen, right? So he invites me over, and then I get invited the next year, and then this starts to build a momentum. Word gets around that in the show is a picture of a building where my grandfather parked his Jeep, and the guy who lived in the building happened to be a guy from Domyślice who's probably more into the American liberation of Czechoslovakia than anybody else in Domyślice. Turns out that my grandfather after the war met his great-grandfather. The name on the outside of the building was Hruška, H-R-U-S-K-A. That's a name that in Two Rivers people know that name. So it's a Michigan area name, Czech name. It means pear, fruit pear. So my grandfather parks his Jeep, looks up and sees the name Hruška, which was the name of his grandmother. And he's like, my God, that's everything. My grandparents are coming back to life. I'm surrounded by this incredible, it's part of the wild set of coincidences. So Amar Ibrahim is his name. He's a Hruška. He then they find out that this is in the show, and then friends get me a gig in Domyślice, and that, you know, the sort of the money shot of the whole story, right? Him in Domyślice, it happens, you know, right there in Domyślice. So then I start being invited to do the show in Domyślice. They made 5 years ago. They made my grandfather an honorary citizen, and then here's where Two Rivers comes in. And then the mayor of Domyślice at the time, Miroslav Mach, he says, Patrick, might Two Rivers be interested in being a sister city? And I said, I will find out. So then I got in touch with the great Brenda Kaprowski, who has just an amazing gift for organizing things. And Brenda saw my show when I did it up in Rochester, New York, not the time that it was broadcast, but she was visiting a friend and they happened to come to the show. I went to school with Brenda's oldest son, Derek Slickman. And then I get a note backstage saying that she was there and can we meet afterwards. So Brenda saw the show before all of this happened, and she knew my grandfather. She's good friends with my mother. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna ask Brenda what she thinks about this idea. And then Brenda thought it was an interesting idea. And she started organizing, and there was, then a group from Two Rivers came over with me, and then we put in together this formal Sister Cities committee, and then the Czechs brought a delegation 2 summers ago to Two Rivers and dedicated a second casting of the bronze plaque that's in Domyślice. Oh, then that was part of what happened. Then on the Hruška building in Domyślice that's where this casting comes from, is this bronze plaque explaining in Czech and in English what this is about. And then the second casting of it then was brought here and now is on the side of the Two Rivers City Hall. So as you come in, you know, to pay your parking ticket or whatever you do in City Hall, stop by and say hi to Greg.
I thought that looked familiar. Yeah.
There's the plaque. And then now there's been this great exchange. There were students from Two Rivers High School, led by the brilliant head of the Two Rivers band, my good friend Andy, they went to Domaschlitz this last November, and a group of students from Domaschlitz were to come in May, but then COVID hit and all of that is scotched. So there now are these deep connections. Two groups that have gone on the Sister City trip. We're going to be doing another one. COVID, knock on wood, if there isn't a problem next May, they will come with me again when I do the show in Domaschlitz, and we'll see other things. So there'll be another delegation going from Two Rivers, and then this exchange Andy Pagel has done with the music students, and these deep connections. The kids all had life-changing experiences. I spoke with Andy's son last week when I was in town, and he told me about how great it was. And I think that we're just sort of scratching the surface. It's much bigger than my grandfather's story. I mean, there are all these Bohemians, that's what they called them back in the day, Czechs,
Yeah.
who are from Domaschlitz, who are buried in the Two Rivers Cemetery, right? This was a focal point for migration from that area, more so than any other place in the United States.
So this is telling a story about a culture, not just your grandfather, but about a way of life, a culture, and sort of what happened to the people living in that place at that time, and all of their stories, really. It's a nice tribute. It's a really nice thing. It all started from some writings that were found in a basement, right?
If he's not down there clacking away on his Remington manual typewriter, Andy Pagel and Jessica Oddie aren't bringing students over to Domaschlitz. Yeah. Andy and Jessica were kind of in this next wave of the kind of Princess Leia Skywalker.
Yeah.
Next wave of it with Two Rivers. She's a science teacher, and is also a brilliant musician. So all Czechs are musicians, so they love the fact that Andy's got such musical chops, and that Jessica's a science teacher, and that she's this great bass player too, and that they brought musicians. And they're all musicians, and they also the national drink is beer, so that fits in somewhat with the Two Rivers culture as well. So it's just a real good fit. I mean, it's sort of the Czech thing, but it's also kind of the American experience, right? I mean, whether you're Polish, whether you're French Canadian, it's this land of immigrants, and that we don't know where. My grandfather spoke the language and didn't know where he came from, and assumed it was bad, right? Or assumed it was like, I got to be something else, right? And there's a certain truth to that, maybe. I mean, things change, and you can't just sort of cling to the past. But then what do you lose in the process, right? Well, then what do you gain in the process of understanding what it means and then reconnecting?
Well, sure. And you see, so many stories of people that migrated to the United States around the turn of 1900 or so, and changed their name, or insisted that their children, or didn't teach their children the language that they knew all their lives. So I guess it's not surprising to hear that. But it's a great story, because it just really, it shows the deep connection between our city and Domaschlitz, and there's deep DNA there that really connects these two places, so geographically distant but spiritually connected, in really important and key ways. So thank you for bringing the story to light. And now, if people want to learn more about the story, or they want to be informed when, again, hoping COVID allows for these things again, when your shows are going to start up again, or sort of what's next for the story of the Accidental Hero, where can they go? What can they find out?
Yeah, the best way to do it would be to friend me on Facebook and send me a message. So it's Patrick DeWane, DeWane, or you can send me an email, and that's the name of the show, Accidental Hero, and then the numeral 1, accidentalhero1 @gmail.com. I've got a website, but because of the cancellations of the gigs because of COVID, that might not be the best place to go to for for information about the gig, but it is a good place to go to for information about the story, and that's accidentalhero.net. And then also, if you go to Wikipedia and enter my grandfather's name, Matt Konop, K-O-N-O-P, there is a Wikipedia entry about his story as well. So there's more and more information that's out there. I also have on YouTube, if you search on my name or my grandfather's name, you'll get to my YouTube channel. Todd, I went to Omaha Beach for the first time this last October.
Oh, wow.
And I shot some video of that. So there's some of that and some of my grandfather's footage that's posted here. You know, he shot film. He had one of these, a little handheld 8mm Kodak camera.
Oh, so cool. Look at that.
So he had a movie camera when he was at the war. So after my sister found his writings, then my uncle said, "Hey, you want to see his movies?" I said, "What are you talking about, Uncle Jack?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I digitized them." It's like, "Oh, you gotta be kidding me." So I've got his movies in the show. I've got vintage photographs. I play a variety of characters. I'll be doing the show again, COVID willing, at the Capitol in Manitowoc in November. And tickets will be going on sale later if in fact this if I am able to do the show. I've done it at the community house on 2 different occasions, including when the Czech delegation was here 2 summers ago. So it'll be around. But if they want more information, or encourage people to contact me, send me something via email, Facebook friend me. I mean, that's how Tomáš got me to the Czech Republic, right? An 18-year-old who didn't go with, well, who am I to do this, right? He's 18 years old, and he invited me to the Czech Republic, and without him doing that, this story doesn't happen. Well,
it's a great story on so many levels of how the actions of one person affects so many other things and makes so many other rich stories come out, and a way to celebrate people and places and culture. Patrick, thanks for joining us on the show today. Really appreciate it, and hope you can come back again, and hope that COVID allows us to get you back out there and on the road and doing your show again too. We'll look forward eagerly to see news about that as well.
Yeah, we'd love to.
And for those of you who are interested in some of the clips and pictures that Patrick mentioned, we will include those as links in the show notes, so you can get over to those and take a look at them, or we may incorporate some of those in the video here. So, Patrick, once again, thank you. And
Greg Buckley's been a great supporter of all of this, huge supporter.
Oh, sure.
He came on the last delegation, and I saw him last week with Brenda Kaprowski, and is enthusiastic about another trip. And I want to thank you and Darla for what you're doing. I mean, it's that same dynamic. When you started out doing it, you could have said, "Oh, who am I to do this?" But you haven't. And then look at all the wonderful things that have come from it, right? I mean, that's the energy that sort of feeds all of this.
It is. So many stories. And just, for me, part of it was just selfishly, I want to learn more about the place in which I live. And Darla and I both had the attitude of, well, nobody else is doing this, so let's get together and talk to people from our city and learn more. You're absolutely right. Like with Greg Buckley, he just gets a great big smile on his face every time. I could tell how much how proud he is of that connection and the opportunity that you and your grandfather created and made possible for us here. So thank you.
Yeah, and the Czechs love 2 rivers. They couldn't get over the beach. There were some of them that swam every day, and one of them said, "Patrick, why is no one swimming in this beautiful beach?" I said, "Well, because when we were kids, we were brought to the beach and we were all freezing."
Right.
If we go to Florida or Hawaii, maybe we get in the water. Otherwise, generally pools. We looking at the water. It's beautiful.
Yes.
So they were just they loved being in 2 rivers. They just loved it. They couldn't believe how cool it was. When we went down and picked them up at O'Hare, it was like a blast furnace, right? It's like 20-mile-an-hour winds, and it was like 94 degrees, and they came, and Kamil said, "Is this typical?" Which is Czech for, "Are we going to be spending a week in hell? You didn't tell us that." And I said, "Kamil, it will not get above 24 degrees Celsius." And he said, "How is this possible? There are no mountains. We're not going to Canada." I said, "Just relax." And then they got up and they're like, "Oh my God." And we took them up to Lambeau Field, and wow, it's like this blast furnace. And then we get back to Two Rivers and they're like,
right. It's true. I mean, you even drive 20 minutes west of Two Rivers and the temperature goes up by 15, 20 degrees, like right away in the summer. So yeah, totally can understand how that freaked them out to have the experience.
One last story. When we were coming back from Lambeau Field, we stopped in Stangleville and went to St. Lawrence Church. It's this gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful church. This Czech, they were not dour about life. They loved life. They loved these colors and everything. So it was great. So they're there, we're showing around the church. And then the last of the indigenous Czech speakers, right? Ray Selner, who's in his 90s. Ray was there. And after all the presentations, he's holding court. All 10 of them are circled around him, and they're all talking in Czech, and they're all laughing uproariously at everything he's saying. So I pulled Kamil aside. I said, so what was that? He said, "Patrick, it was like watching a black and white movie with a Hodsko farmer." He is telling us jokes that our grandparents told us.
Oh, they had to be so happy about that.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah, no, we're all connected.
Oh, that's amazing. Patrick DeWane, the accidental hero, and again, you can connect with him on Facebook or at theaccidentalhero.net. Correct?
Yes, correct.